Go. Okay. All right. Well, welcome. This presentation is entitled Western Civilization at Risk. And the picture that you see before you is the most fitting picture that is impacting America today. And that's liberty and freedom against Marxism and communism. This is understanding the times through a biblical worldview lens. And it's to address our spiritual war. This is cultural Marxism versus Western civilization. The contents of the whole slide presentation will discuss the difference biblical worldview education makes, God's design for social order, and we'll probably only get through these two today. What is cultural Marxism? Cultural Marxism devastation and cycle of nations. If we're going to present this further, these will follow on. So, Christian worldview or biblical worldview education. This chart shows the difference of Christian students from Christian homes that have been tested with the Peers test. Peers stands for politics, economics, education, religion, and social issues. There are 4 categories of students on this chart. The top category here are those students that attend a biblical worldview school. That's less than 2% of Christian students attending a Christian worldview school. And as you can see, they are the top rated or top grading class. And this is biblical theism as their category goes. This test was being taken, it's a series of tests being given between 1988 and 2021. The students are all high school students that have been tested. So this is what, a 33-year trend of Christian students attending these different types of schools. The next category are the homeschooled students. They consist of, on the average, less than 3% of Christian youth being homeschooled, and on average, they're in the moderate Christian range. So this is still a decent range to fall into for a Christian. Now, those that are attending the traditional Christian schools, there's a big difference between a biblical worldview school and a traditional Christian school. So this next line, this orange line, really dips down from a moderate Christian back in 1988 down into secularism. And this is a trend that's 10 to 12% of Christian students fall into. The majority of students, 80 to 85% of Christian students are attending the public schools. As you can see, they were right on the brink of being secularists back in 1988. Now they are falling into the socialism realm. These are pretty strong. They're getting to be pretty strong Marxist at this point. Now, Dan Smithwick runs the Peers test, and back in the 1980s, he categorized biblical theism, moderate Christian, secularism, and socialism. I put a book together called Political Correctness, A Deceptive and Dangerous Worldview, and I break it down into Western civilization and cultural Marxism. So in this range here is cultural Marxism. And those are students that are attending the traditional Christian schools and the public schools. And up in here is Western civilization. This is where our founding fathers were, up in this area. And anywhere from 5 to a maximum of 10% of Christian students are in this category here. So the majority of Christian high school students are cultural Marxist. Now, a Christian worldview education will create or help foster a student with a biblical theist worldview, as well as a non-believer. Now, in The Battle for the American Mind, which is a recent book, it demonstrated that back in our founding era, in the late, 1700s, a number of the founding fathers were not professing Christians, but they were theists. They all had a Christian worldview education. So you could be a non-believer, have a Christian worldview education, and still hold to a biblical theist worldview as far as engaging in our culture. Now, those self-proclaiming Christians who attend a government school will come out as humanist, cultural Marxist. And this comes out based on the Peers test. The Victims of Communism has conducted studies, or they've hired a firm to conduct studies, and those non-believers that are attending government schools prefer communism, socialism, or fascism over capitalism. So they are falling into the socialist category. And that's the result of our two different forms of education system, the government or school system and a Christian worldview education. Now, what I'm showing here is God's design for social order. Our founding fathers, based on Western civilization, built our governing documents based on God's design of social order. And what we have in this God's design of social order is within the whole circle here, it's all based on the laws of nature and nature's God. And in this whole social order, we have the individual, represented by the individualism sphere, and it's based on self-government, formed by faith, virtue, truth, and liberty. Another sphere is the marriage and family. Their role is to procreate and educate. And back in the founding era, that's exactly what the family was doing. They were responsible for the education. Then you have the church, and the church is to unify moral principles, and they actually formed a symbiotic relationship with the state. It's basically establishing the moral principles across the nation, which impacted the operation of our state. Another sovereign sphere is commerce and stewardship, which is to grow national and personal wealth. Then we have the sphere of community and neighbor. And this sphere is to nourish personality, to serve and protect it from external caprice. And back in our founding era, if you read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, the two strong associations in America was the church and the community, in the form of organizations that automatically just formed up when the population saw a need to organize on different issues. And then we have the state. Now, in the United States, our government was founded on the organic laws of the United States. And they are, as prescribed in Scripture, Romans 13, to protect negative rights, which are inalienable rights that God gave us, and to restrain evil. Now, I'll be going into these in a little bit more detail, but I want to emphasize that each one of these spheres is self-governing. The church has its own government system. whether it's an Episcopalian government or a Presbyterian government or a congregational government. The deacons, elders, and pastors are the governing officials. The marriage and the family, they are self-governed, with the husband and the wife governing over the children. Individual, self-governing, as I explained before. In commerce, each business owner governs his own business. In the community, each organization that forms, they have their own form of government. None of these need any outside interference to operate and manage themselves. And then you have the civil government, which is founded on the organic laws of the United States. And all of this is based on the laws of nature and nature's God. This is one area that is not taught in the church, not taught at Christian colleges, not taught in Christian schools, and obviously not taught in public schools. But I encourage every Christian to start studying the laws of nature and nature's God. And you can begin your study on a website. It's lonang.com. And in there, they have downloads, and they have a strong number of articles on all different topics, but it's all based on the laws of nature and nature's God. So the most basic unit of society is the individual. Each individual is an institution as much as a family, a nation, or the universal church. Self-government is also the most basic unit of government. In fact, all natural rights and all natural freedoms are bestowed exclusively on individuals. This is a most critical statement. Without self-government, none of the other social institutions would be sustainable. Now, self-government is based on a Christian worldview. So as the public gets further away from having a Christian worldview, the less capable that public will be of self-government. And that's at a stage we are today. There's very few Bible-believing Christians within the whole scope of the United States population. Now, here is the most essential missing element today, which is the family. All government originates in families, and if neglected there, it will hardly exist in society. The foundation of all free government and of all social order must be laid in families and in the discipline of youth. The education of youth is an employment of more consequence than making laws. So what it's saying is that the education of youth is much more important than politics. And preaching the gospel let me go back. Education of youth is of more consequence than preaching the gospel, because it lays the foundation on which both the law and gospel rest for success. So Noah Webster is pinpointing a Christian worldview education as the most critical element or function that we can be doing within the Christian community. And the institution of the state is quite dependent on the existence of a strong and healthy institution of the church, which it does not control. What he's saying is that the church doesn't control the state and the state doesn't control the church. And this is to build men and women in righteousness for service and ministry. Without a strong church that makes disciples, the state soon goes wayward due to the sinfulness of its leaders. And that is very apparent in this day and age. The organic laws of the United States. The organic laws are our governing authority, not political office holders or bureaucrats. So if you refer to Romans 13, 1-7, it talks about the governing authority. Most in the church will say, well, it's the president or it's Congress or it's a judge or the governor, but that's wrong. The governing authority in this nation consists of the organic laws of the United States. The 4 organic laws of the United States are Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the Northwest Ordinance, and the U.S. Constitution. Now, the reason they call this the organic laws is they are the foundation for the United States of America, which means that no statute or code should conflict with the principles set forth in these documents. And as you're all aware, the Constitution has primarily become a doormat anymore. It's pretty much ignored, and our politicians are coming up with their own set of laws that do not conform to the laws of nature nor nature's God. And they've set up the bureaucracies which are imposing their own set of laws on the population. In order to understand what the Constitution says, we have to understand the first 3 organic laws. The Constitution is the final part of the organic laws. And the primary purpose of the 4 organic laws is to regulate and control the government, not us. Organic laws are our governing authority, not political office holders or bureaucrats. And you find the organic laws listed in the front of the U.S. Code, Volume 1. You will see the title, Organic Laws of the United States. That means these have been codified. That means they should be used. But you could ask any politician in office, and I will guarantee that not one of them has any reference to this whatsoever. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that when a politician takes his oath to support the Constitution, he not only swears to uphold that document, but all the founding charters of our country, which together are called the organic law. So think about that. When you see a politician take the oath of office to support and defend the Constitution, they're taking the oath of office to support the organic laws of the United States, which means it's incumbent upon them to know those organic laws. The secret of why we are where we are today, seemingly powerless, with nothing but a vote, becomes clear once you understand the founding documents of the United States of America have been swept under the rug and forgotten. These documents should be the foundation source of all written law in America. Because these are not in our education system, they've been forgotten. The population, especially the Christians who should be taught this, as well as every student in K through 12, should be taught about the organic laws. But unfortunately, as this note states, those laws have been swept under the rug and long forgotten. We need to bring them out from under the rug and present them to politicians, to our congregations, and to our neighbors and friends. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Well, this is addressing the organic laws. Now, we, the people, are the sovereigns of the nation. And this is a concept that we've lost. We are the sovereigns of the nation. And the civil servants and elected politicians are our servants by administering the U.S. and state constitutions to secure our rights and promote the general welfare within the limited constitutional legal boundaries and jurisdictions. When they all take the oath of office, as I said, they are all swearing to uphold the organic laws of the U.S. Therefore, the organic laws of the U.S. are a governing authority. And we should be upfront and let the world know that these are the organic laws and they are to be followed. So now going back to our design for social order, the organic laws, the state has a very limited jurisdiction. You notice that there's no overlap of these sovereign spheres. They are all separate. They're all sovereign unto themselves. There may be some interdependence, but they operate independently. And the state should be held to a very limited bounds and only interfere with any of these other institutions as they violate the inalienable rights and break law. We have time now to take a look at the progressive era transformation. Now, this progressive era transformation began in the mid to late 1800s, and it started in our university system. Our university system was founded on godly principles and the biblical worldview. And in the law schools, the laws of nature and nature's God was the predominant form of law being taught in the law schools. You may have heard of William Blackstone's commentaries on the law. Well, that was basically the textbook that was being used in our law schools. That's what all our founding fathers had built our nation on. Now, what has happened in the mid to late 1800s is that we started looking at Europe, particularly Germany, and their university program and their curriculum, and we started importing that into our university system. This took place shortly after Darwin's laws came out on evolution. Actually, theory came out on evolution. So the first thing to go was the laws of nature. They were replaced by positive laws. Positive laws are arbitrary laws that people, politicians, create under the circumstance without any reference to God. Then the organic laws of the United States swept under the rug. And in the early 1900s, we adopted the concept of the living, breathing Constitution with arbitrary interpretations. And this we can thank justices such as Oliver Wendell Holmes and President Woodrow Wilson, who brought this concept into full circle in the nation. So now all of a sudden, the U.S. government started growing and became more of a central government using these arbitrary interpretations. The next to go, the most basic unit of society, per the Christian idea of man, is the individual. Each individual is an institution as much as the family, a nation, or the universal church. Self-government is also the most basic unit of the government. In fact, all natural rights, all freedoms are bestowed exclusively on individuals. Without self-government, none of the other social institutions would be sustainable. Well, that gets in the way of our progressive government. So, however, this concept of individualism and self-government gets in the way of these socialist, Marxist agenda for collectivism and control, such as giving and taking away rights. So as the laws of nature went, and we got the living, breathing Constitution, inalienable rights also disappeared or were disappearing. And the government started creating a new set of rights. Therefore, reform education and alter the outcome. And by reforming education and altering the outcome, the individual disappears and gets defined as human capital, as economic units for the state. So the individual rights took a leap. We became human capital, and we have lost our sovereignty, or beginning to lose our sovereignty of the nation here, and we are becoming servants as the state becomes the master. That's the transition that this nation has gone through. Then we have the declining influence of the church. The basic problem of the Christians in this country in the last 80 years or so, in regard to society, in regard to government, is that they have seen things in bits and pieces instead of totals. They have very gradually become disturbed over permissiveness, pornography, public schools, the breakdown of the family, and finally abortion. But they have not seen this as a totality, each thing being a part and a symptom of a much larger problem. They have failed to see that all of this has come about due to a shift in worldview. This Francis Schaeffer stated back in around 1970. So what he was addressing is this change actually started in the late 1800s, where the church began losing influence. In fact, the church, in a lot of respects, threw up its hand and said, okay, all these secular issues dealing with the society and state, they could be handled by the secularists. We'll just focus on the spiritual aspect. So the church became very pietistic, focusing just on sin and salvation, and giving up on the rest of the influence of the church within society. So what happened is the church fell apart then. Instead of being unified with the goal of sin and salvation, as well as taking care of the social order, the church split apart. Some became progressive, bringing in the social gospel. Others became evangelistic, into the pietistic mode. We got the charismatic church coming out. So the church broke up and stopped its unity of moral enforcement in the nation. And then the family. I won't. Well, I can. There's time to read this. So Chesterton goes on to say that it is found in practice that the domestic citizen can stand a siege, even by the state, because he has those who will stand by him through thick and thin, especially the thin. In other words, the family is the little platoon fighting against the globalist ideology that threatens to make every individual a mindless automaton. Unfortunately, in recent decades, the globalist elite have been pretty effective at breaking up this little platoon. This last line of defense, for example, the introduction of personal electronic devices, which isolate individuals and promise virtual gratification for all their appetites, the push to divide women's attention between home and the workforce, the ease of divorce, the glorification of transgenderism and homosexuality, which lead to further isolation and infertility, the mass messaging that children are a burden. All of these things are devices used by the elite, in this case, our cultural Marxists today, to break down the traditional family, which could stand against the onslaught of the servile state when the family was strong and working in its traditional mode. A large family, let's see, I can't read that, I'm sorry. Let me go back. A large family that loves one another by these means forms a sturdy battle formation indeed. You may have heard the term recently, atomization of society. Our society has become atomized. The breakup of the family, and the breakup of organizations. The local community has disappeared, and there's been a tremendous strong focus only on Washington, D.C. What is going on in Washington, D.C.? We have lost sight of what's happening in our cities, our communities, in our schools, and in our local area. We've lost touch with each other. So we have become atomized. And as you can see here, along with the family, the community is to nourish personality and serve to protect it from external power and caprice. Well, the family's broken up. With the welfare, the dad's disappeared, and the local community has disappeared. It's been fractured. So neighbor doesn't know neighbor in many cases, thanks to TV and automatic garage door openers. And we've also lost touch in our local communities. A lot of local organizations have shrunk or disappeared. So there's been that loss of local community. And the church has pretty much been, you meet on Sunday, you listen to a sermon. There's not been a whole lot of interaction among the congregants within the churches. And so that sense of community and that sense of nourishing has been lost in the church as well. So as this is taking place, our living, breathing Constitution has empowered the central government more and more. And as international corporations have grown to be too big to fail, they've developed into a mode of crony capitalism, working with the politicians. So now we have the public-private partnerships. We have the civil government, along with the NGO, non-governmental organization partnerships, and intergovernmental organizations. These are more in the world organizations, along with the too big to fail crony capitalism of the corporations. They've formed partnerships, and they're working hand in hand right now. If you're familiar with the World Economic Forum, this is one of the major organizations which is impacting the events of the world today. And that is based on this crony capitalism with our government. So in order to successfully sabotage the sovereignty of the United States as a nation, the Constitution as supreme law must first be deconstructed or reinterpreted apart from its historical, authorial, and principled context, and textually dismantled. The daunting and alarming consequences are the eventual loss of America's historic principles of liberty, such as individuality, self-government, liberty of conscience, private property, and limited self-government, and limited civil government with its Republican and federal structure. And I think that you could probably take a look and find examples of all of these elements in today's culture. Modern society, on the other hand, has turned God's social order on its head, making the civil state the highest of all human achievements, and the private sector as a mere provider for the state's needs. Recall, we've been changed from individuals to human capital. That's providing the state's needs. The very opposite of God's design for society is the belief that the economy, the means of production, and economic control in society are all primarily the domain of the civil state. This belief is known as statism, which is merely a form of collectivism. And collectivism is the mantra of the modern age. Now, this was written by, and a little side note, this was written by Gerald R. Thompson. He's an attorney. He's got the authority to go before the Supreme Court. And he is the president of Lonang.com. Laws of Nature and Nature's God.com. And in one of the free downloads, he has an article, God's Laws of Authority. I highly recommend that you go to that website, download this article, and read it for yourself. That this is a powerful article. As long as everyone stays in the spheres of authority God gave them, society will benefit. From God's perspective, this makes each jurisdiction or each social sphere or institution co-equal with the others. The entire history of the world, in a sense, is one long example of people overstepping their proper authority and usurping the authority of others, and also overstepping God's authority in matters that he never delegated to anyone to do. They're playing God. And these progressives, Marxists, socialists, they're basically atheists. They don't recognize a supernatural God. Their God is central government. That's why when they get in charge, they start empowering and growing central government more and more. Government has become the God of the United States for half the population of this nation.
Mr. Hawkins, can I
Yes,
interrupt
ma'am.
with a question? So
Yes.
what are some of the authorities that God never delegated to anyone?
Education. God has prescribed education of children to the parents. The state has no authority to be involved with education of children. That's probably the biggest one. That's probably the one that's been the biggest downfall. The state has no authority getting involved in family affairs. The state has no authority mandating vaccination. That's totally contrary to our organic laws. The state has no authority to try and alter private industry, change private industry, such as Facebook and Twitter and Google, to control speech or censorship, i.e., that misinformation business. The government has no authority at all to step into private industry and tell them what they can and can't talk about. The state has no authority to tell the church to be quiet, particularly on political issues. Now, there's a big misunderstanding there because the law basically says that the church at the pulpit cannot endorse a candidate. It does not preclude from the pulpit discussing political issues as long as candidates are not named in political issues. So the pulpit has full authority to discuss what the laws of nature and nature's God says regarding upcoming elections and certain policies that are being voiced on the campaign trail, such as this thing on abortions, or this thing on the LGBTQ business and CRT. There's nothing precluding the church from discussing those issues and teaching the biblical worldview aspect on all of these subjects. The church should be teaching about explaining that there's the organic laws of the United States. They are governing authorities. That's what we should abide by, and we should stand up against any authority, any other authority that's contrary to the organic laws of the United States. Other aspects are the the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. We should recognize that lesser magistrates within our government levels have the responsibility to intercede on our behalf if a higher authority is acting unconstitutionally. So if coming from the federal government, there's mandates for unconstitutional actions such as wearing masks, the governors have full authority to say, no, we are not going, that's unconstitutional. We are not going to enforce that in this state. Now, what's her name? Christine Noem, I think it is, up in South Dakota. She stood up and said, no, we're not doing that. We'll let industry, each business, decide whether or not they want a mask. But from the state level, from within our local government level, we are not going to enforce the mask mandate. And when we traveled the nation back in 2020, we went through, gosh, 18 states that year. Most of them were all requiring masks wherever you went. We got into South Dakota and wow, we were in a land of freedom as soon as we crossed the border into South Dakota. It was day and night difference. It was like going from a third world country and back into a free country again.
Yeah, we did do a short cross country to Tennessee as well, and it was interesting to see how the different stores, dealt with that mandate. But just one follow-up question: how is wearing mask? I mean, it was not mentioned in the Constitution, so how are you claiming that it's unconstitutional?
Well, they don't have the authority to mandate what we wear.
The negative, so the negative rights,
yeah, and on top of that, there was no scientific basis for that order. There was nothing justifying what they had mandated.
Thank you.
And also the government, the civil government does not have that authority to mandate that into the individual states. Now, the individual states, depending on how their constitutions are written, may or may not have that authority, but the federal government does not have that authority to step in the states with that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Oh, and other aspects of what the state should not be doing, the central government should not be controlling our medical issues. And more, I think the largest, as I recall, the largest budget item of the U.S. government is now medical care. The next item is welfare. Now, welfare has been destructive to the family, and the central government had no authority constitutionally to institute welfare programs, nor Social Security. There is so much that is out of whack based on the original interpretation of our Constitution when interpreted based on the organic laws.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Cycle of nations. Israel had gone through, when reading scripture, a number of cycles from blessing, being satisfied, gaining a proud heart, forgetting God, God putting Israel under judgment. Many times then the people cried out to God. They remembered God. They repented of their sin. God returned them back to blessings. Now, as long as in the satisfied stage, the citizens approached God in humility and thankfulness and righteousness within the society, they were satisfied and they continued up in this cycle. They continued getting blessings and continued being satisfied. But then they varied. They got a proud heart, particularly when Israel broke away from Judah. Proud heart, forgot God. And shortly after that, God put them into destruction. He destroyed Israel, then destroyed Judah. But they had survived a number of cycles before they entered into destruction. Now we are in that moment of judgment by most every count of Christian that's publicizing out there. We are in a period of judgment, and we are actually going through some form of destruction now. Whether or not the Christian community grows and remembers what God had done for America and repent, unless we go through these forms here, we will go into destruction if we follow the same cycle that we saw Israel, both Israel and Judah, go through. And this all goes back to education. Whether or not we are producing a next generation with a biblical worldview that knows and understands Western civilization and our form of government as originally as God designed and our founding fathers gave us, or if we continue this trend of cultural Marxism sliding into socialism, that's going to be one of the major makes and breaks of this nation in the near future. And it doesn't take the whole population to have a Western civilization worldview, but it takes a good leadership of a small group that is unified in this, makes it possible. So if you take a look at the CRT, the critical race theory, and all the protests and demonstrations and destruction that went on, that was done by an extremely small percentage of the population. But if you looked at the nightly news, it was like the whole nation was involved. And that wasn't the case. It was a very, very small percentage. Okay, I had talked about this before. The education of the youth is the most consequence for making laws and preaching the gospel. So what we need to do is become one nation under God again, if there's an opportunity for restoration and if it's in God's will. We do not know at this moment what's in his plans. We know in the long run what's in his plans, but not in the near future. Our Constitution, along with the organic laws, are based on the teachings of Jesus Christ. And that's why he's holding the Constitution here. What we have is we have those secularists, the progressives, the Marxists, that have been in the process of destroying the nation, the judges, politicians, university professors, media moguls, our media, entertainment, our bankers. They've all been in cahoots in helping to destroy the nation. We have the common everyday individual, the patriots, and then we have a history of patriots standing behind firmly on what this nation has been founded on. The U.S. Constitution is the climax of the American constitutional tradition that is founded on Jesus Christ. We worship Jesus and are thankful for his influence for our constitutional republic. We do not worship the Constitution. That's been a tool that was developed based on the truth and teachings of Jesus Christ. America's unique and peculiar political and constitutional philosophy rests on a pre-modern Christian perspective of man, of God, man, and government. The American political tradition has been largely infused with Protestant Christian reading of the scriptures, from which the principles of individuality, liberty of conscience, self-government, private property, and limited civil authority are derived. The American political system attempted to ensure that sovereignty in a final and absolute way would never be lodged within any single level of government for liberty's sake. The constitutional procedure also represented an institutional recognition of the widely held view that God alone is absolutely and ultimately sovereign. As John Adams stated, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And let that sink in. We will not be able to restore our constitutional republic as it was originally designed without restoring a biblical worldview through a good strength of our citizenship. And that puts a huge burden on the church to share the gospel and to train disciples up into a biblical worldview so they aren't being tossed to and fro by human deception.